Welcome everyone to yet another new episode of Tevora Talks. I am your host, Cash, and joined by my newest, well, somewhat newest, he's always been my partner in cybercrime, but newest member of the Tevora Talks, Mr. Clayton Rines. Clayton, how you doing? Welcome back to your
Doing well.
episode two.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for being back, Clayton. Today, we're keeping the new element here, and we have one of our awesome colleagues, Mr. Josh Johnson, senior architect here at Tevora, joining us on the call. Josh, welcome to Tevora Talks. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, we know who you are. Our listeners definitely don't. So wanted to take a time if you wanted to say, hey, who's Josh? How did you get into cybersecurity? And then we'll kind of get our listeners into all the fun stuff that you guys want to talk about today.
Yeah, for sure. I'm like Cash mentioned, I'm Josh Johnson. I work for Tevora. I'm one of our senior solution architects. Been in cybersecurity for about 15 years now. I started in computer forensics, strangely enough. Jumped from that into a number of different things with various vendors, and now I work more as an advisory CISO or field CISO for a lot of our customers, making solutions recommendations and then kind of talking about their cyber posture and how we can help with that.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. I didn't know that you started out in forensics. We should definitely have some side combos in the future next time I see you. That's
Yeah,
awesome,
for
bro.
sure.
But for our listeners out there, Josh and Clay ping me and say, hey, Cash, we have some cool stuff we want to talk about. So I'm going to kind of just pass the reins to them. I know there's a few exciting topics that are really hot in the cyber realm this recent month. And of course, we know there's new stuff all the time that we always like to bring you new and new and new. So I'm just going to pass it to you guys. I know you wanted to mention a little bit more about Josh specifically. You kind of wanted to go into a little bit of that situation with North Korea and IT workers, right?
Yeah, I was listening to your guys' last podcast and I was having a conversation with Clayton kind of specifically about, KnowBe4 and what happened with them and the North Korean
Right.
hacker that they brought on. There's actually an interesting dynamic of that. I don't know if anybody read the kind of RCA or whatever they call it for what happened internally, but I think the biggest takeaways for them is that they did a background check, but it failed because they were only validating with email. And the reason this came up, I was talking to Clayton. We have a few projects with some of our customers where we're working with the various different vendors that kind of cover this space. There's guys like Authenticate.com or ClearMe, if you're familiar with Clear at the airport, who do actual physical validation of people along with their government issue ID. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to solve that for the various industry like banking and healthcare industries that we work with who are kind of a large target for this. But one of the other things Clayton and I were talking about, there's actually been large North Korean laptop farms that have been taken down within the last, I think it's 9 months that they've taken down two of them, and the people are being charged with various level of crimes, and they go to jail for like 20 years, basically for just running laptops with remote execution software so that the North Korean government can make money.
So, like, how big are these, you know, laptop farms? How big are we talking about? Did they mention anything like that?
One of them said they're running like 15 laptops at their house. So basically, just they have a different address that they give you to ship the laptop to. They plug it in and then install remote connection software. They log in and they actually perform the job to some extent before they install malware and start doing various collection activity, trying to exploit whatever they can from these organizations. But the average employees were making a couple hundred grand a year, and just paying a little bit of that to the person who was hosting the laptops.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like an insider threat-esque.
Yeah, it's like a user authentication problem, right? I mean, you mentioned the back. I mean, everyone does background checks, still do background checks, but there's that initial, usually email only user authentication component, right? Which is now being abused. These people are masquerading
Right.
as other people, right? And that's
Well,
really what
yeah,
you're
they're
advocating for, right,
stealing
Josh?
identities. Yeah, I mean, they're stealing people's identities, right? So the Social Security hack that kind of happened this week kind of plays into this as well. Is they're literally taking actual people who work in IT, their identities, and using them to apply for these jobs, and then they're using AI to modify the pictures so that they can look like on a WebEx, my picture comes up on the WebEx, I'm not on video. You can't necessarily tell if I'm who I say I am. And so that's where these softwares kind of come into play. And there's a lot of other things you can do in the HR process, like making sure you require video, making sure that the physical location I'm shipping things to is the same location that shows up on my I-9 when I submit a document or try to set up my bank account information, things like that. It's actually a really in-depth exploitation of the hiring process is what they're going through.
That's wild.
Yeah,
I
that
know
makes sense. Yeah.
that's kind of like what me and you were talking about, Clayton, last episode. This whole new, AI, and impersonation. It's increasing, right?
Yeah,
You know,
100%. I mean, especially in the KnowBe4 case, I mean, it was done over, Zoom. And if you've never met someone in person, how do you know that it's necessarily AI? I mean, maybe you can figure it out, but it apparently it's good enough to fool your average HR person. So that should be scary enough.
big
Well, I
time.
think the big thing there, right, is that they used a picture, they pretended to be somebody, used AI to enhance the picture. And then when they went through all of the various processes, there were a few red flags like, hey, I live here, here's my address, but here's where I want you to ship the laptop to, totally
Yeah.
different location. All of the references that they validated over email, didn't speak to anybody on the phone. I think that there's some red flags that happen there, but when we look at all these softwares like Authenticate.com, Persona, VerifyIf, ClearMe, the concept being is that they're looking at what is a valid issue identification card, whether it's a driver's license, state issue, social security number, various different IDs across the world, and validating that that does match up with the person who live has to either take a selfie or do some form of biometric comparison. And so they're using that to actually prove the identity of these people. And that's just the next step that you can start to take. It can still be defeated, but it's a new way to try and, make it more difficult for the attackers.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
the
feel it.
employee authentication method, I think that's definitely key. And that I'm glad you had some solutions for that because I think, even the KnowBe4 write-up said, give people a waiting period or something else, which I don't know was going to work well, but this sounds much better.
Yeah, I think some
Yeah,
kind of like
it's
information
Mhm.
for sure. We always talk about it. It's a big thing, right? It's like you can put all these tools and bells and whistles in place, but the human factor is the one that we have to kind of train, or at least put some new policy or procedure in place, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Definitely right. And from an HR perspective, I think the thing that they were doing is they weren't actually having live video. They were just having a picture that appeared to be this person and matched the fake ID that they put together. So one of the things that we constantly recommend to our customers is if you are interviewing someone, put them on video. If they can't figure out how to get video to work, if we're working in an IT environment and they can't figure out how to get video to work, maybe they're not a candidate that's qualified for that job. And at the same point in time, maybe they're trying to trick you into being someone else. Like I've run into this for years when we were doing staffing services at a different company. We would have this group of people where one of them would interview and he was brilliant. He knew everything. He would be able to answer all the questions, but that was not who showed up to work on the day that we hired them. We would have other
Okay.
people showing up. And they were I'm dead serious. They were pooling resources. So essentially, there's like 10 of them. A few of them can interview. The other ones just go show up at work, and we'll work with the person who actually knows how to do the job to try and do the job well enough to not get caught.
That's wild. That makes Have you guys seen that series Suits where the guy just takes the bar for everybody? That's kind of the premise of how it is.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Very much so. Yeah, very similar.
Like, what, you want an IT job? No problem. I'll go interview for you, and then you show up. That's crazy. I haven't heard that. But I think somewhere in the midst of what you said is it ties into this other huge problem that's kind of affecting a very, very, very big chunk of the US population right now. It's kind of what Clayton, you were mentioning, this whole oops, our social security numbers for the millionth time are leaked, but now it's like such a big leak that
Yeah.
I don't know, it's raising more concerns. Should I be more concerned? Because we all know our social security numbers are for sure out there. And I mean, the social security number itself is not the most cryptic system. It's like what, 10 digits?
Yeah.
So I don't know. What did
I
you
mean,
what did you read about that? Is there anything else?
what struck me about that, I mean, it was the background check basically database that was leaked, and well, it's tying back to another story that we talked about, which is leaked credentials, right? So there was a site with a backup, a zip file that had credentials in there. That was credentials were applicable to a different site that was used to access that other site and then pull down all the information, right? So 272 million social security numbers and other ancillary information used in background checks, right? So obviously very, very sensitive. But what struck me most about this is people really care? I feel like 10 years ago, people would have been freaking out, would have been front page news. It made the news, but is everyone just jaded now? Are we over this? I mean, ever since the Experian leak, which had a similar impact, right? Hundreds of millions of social security numbers of background checks were leaked as part of that leak. I mean, your SSN is probably out there and probably has been out there. Are people actually at that point? Are they giving up? Are they jaded? I don't know, but that was most alarming for me was people seem to not really care that much like they used to.
Yeah, I mean, like my own initial reaction, I read, the cyber news every night before I go to sleep. I'm like, oh, okay, another leak of my social. That's how I
Right.
reacted. What was your guys' reaction?
Yeah,
I think
similar, right? I mean, it's happened so many times between Experian and the records management department for the U.S. government. My stuff's been out there for years. I'm aware of it. I think the thing that's most concerning is what else was with it, and how realistic is it that you're ever going to be able to protect your information? Like they're all going to give us credit monitoring services, and sure, that's helpful and it's important to make sure that they don't really steal anything from us if they attempt to steal our identities, but I mean, we still see people use the leak from LinkedIn back in like 2010 for real data when they try to socially engineer people. So, I mean, the data's out there. It's just how much more of it do they need and how much better is it going to help them in their endeavors?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a sticky. I always think about it personally. I don't know. I wanted to get your guys' take on it, but I feel that, this whole social security number came out ages ago. I have no idea when it was established, right? I'm pretty sure early on, maybe 70s. I don't no idea really. But we're in 2020 and it's still this archaic. It's definitely not encrypted by all means. It's a very plain text 10-digit number. There's no letters, there's no special characters,
Right.
nothing, right? Where is that gonna go? What do you guys think? Are they gonna be able to improve? Because it just keeps getting hacked left and right.
Yeah, shoot, if we're moving at government speed, it's going to take a while, but I would imagine there'd be some digital authentication or some sort of identity that could be tied to you. I think SSN will persist probably forever, but it may not be as considered a secret or private like it used to be, right? Obviously.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe back to what Josh was saying, combine it with some biometric, right? Okay, here's your social. That's like maybe 10% of the battle. But then I don't know, eyeball, retina
Yeah,
scan,
right. I'm
something.
not a big fan of biometrics. I don't know. I mean, here's the problem. Well, one, it's a probability thing. It's never like you're 100% your fingerprint or your retina or something else, right? Because it's always a probability thing. So there's never certainty. And the second piece is if you scan the iris of my face or my eye and you've hacked that, you've reproduced that, I can't get new eyes. So what am I supposed to do? I can't get new factors, right? I can't get new fingerprints. I can't get a new retina. So what am I going to do when that's compromised and you can replay my retina?
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, I don't know, fake eyes.
It's
Well,
always going to get hacked, man. Everything's getting hacked.
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, I really don't want my biometric data out there, right? But at some level, they're going to have to do something different for some level of authentication. The problem is that it's always going to get hacked. Someone's always going to steal it. And what level of protection can we put in place? Because passwords aren't going to work. We'll always be able to crack passwords, or the passwords will get leaked. So it's not a problem I have an answer to, but I know that's got to change eventually, right? Social Security's been around since I think the 40s when FDR established it, but
Yeah.
wow.
I mean, it's never going to go away. So there's money invested in it. The government uses it for everything. It's just how are we going to use to identify ourselves as we apply for credit or try to buy homes and different things like that.
Yeah, it
Do you
makes me think,
think? Go
Clayton, what
ahead,
you
Cash.
said about the whole retina scan. I don't if it's that movie, Minority Report, where
Right.
what's the character? I forget the actor's name. where he has to go like get new eyeballs essentially because his eyeballs are flagged. So he just
Right.
goes to some guy and takes his
Yeah.
eyeball and shoves somebody else's eyeball in there. But yeah,
Right.
to your point, what are you gonna do? You can't get more eyeballs. At least yet.
Yeah. Pretty wild.
But yeah, it's interesting. What else? There was something else that you wanted to you brought up
Yeah.
played.
It's one of those nightmare scenarios on the Windows remote code execution for IPv6. And this one got a fair amount of press, but if you're not aware, right? So basically, there was this exploit for Windows, any IPv6 enabled Windows, which is basically everything. You probably have to have a reason to turn it off if you've ever turned it off, but anything Windows 7 and above had IPv6 enabled by default. And you may not be getting an IPv6 address, but that's listening on that interface, right? So most folks will have, especially on the server side, IPv6 enabled. And I think even on the Windows clustering back in the day, it used to be required to have IPv6 between clustered hosts. I don't know if that's still the case, but suffice it to say, IPv6 very prevalent and on by default on Windows hosts. And this was a authenticationless exploit. So malformed packets or series of packets. It's actually a buffer underflow could give you remote code execution without any action on the endpoint at all, which is crazy, right? And
Big time.
that's super scary because anytime there's no user activity required or any credentials required of any kind, you can just look sideways at this host and get access to it potentially. Now, they did say there was no exploit out in the wild, but this is one of those super juicy ones that even if it was, I don't think you'd know about it. This is like Stuxnet level as far as I'm concerned, right? This could be something that was used for a long time. You'll never know. But certainly it's certainly scary. And Microsoft patched it right away. I think it came out with the patch Tuesday, so I don't even know how long they were sleeping on it. Didn't come out of cycle, which was interesting as well. But definitely one of those like, oh my gosh, we got a patch right now moments.
So, but they have patched it since at
It has,
least.
yeah, the patch. It was basically announced when the patch was available.
Oh, okay, that's at least a little bit better.
Yeah.
Assuming
But
Yeah,
just
people
I
because there's a
always,
patch out doesn't mean that everyone's applied it, right? I mean,
yeah,
how many, I
exactly.
mean, you guys know this, like how many of our customers have a patching schedule that's behind, use a certain piece of software to manage those patches. They have critical servers that they can't patch. So awesome. Thank you, Microsoft, for telling us. We have no idea how long you knew about it, but
yeah.
how long is it going to take for me to get it out to all of the machines in my environment? And like Clayton said, there's probably been people who've been using this at the state actor level for at least a couple of years, and we just had no idea about it because if you don't know about it, they're not going to find it in a piece of in anything from CrowdStrike or whatever research facility out there. No one's going to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, I do some vulnerability management here or there for some of our clients, and it seems easy, right? Hey, there's a patch available. But when we have, maybe 5 devices, okay, small shop, one by one, not going to affect production, but it's a little bit more involved, right? Sometimes patching something simple could have its own downstream effects. And not to mention, what if I have 10, 20,000 devices in our environment? Some of these patches got to reset maybe if it's a critical system, you can't just shut it down middle of the day. There's a whole process. So it's a little bit easier said than done for sure. But
Yeah. I mean, the whole TCP/IP stack is getting patched. So any connection is going to get interrupted. I guarantee you, right? To be able to apply that patch. And how quickly can you apply it? You still got to go through all the testing. I mean, even Josh, what do you see out there? I mean, even our most sophisticated clients and customers, they're measuring patch time in days. It has to go through some testing, something in pre-production, go through change management, even expedited, right? It's going to take at least hours, probably days in practice. I don't know anyone's getting better than that.
I don't think there is anybody who's getting better than that, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole crux of the issue that we had a couple weeks ago with one of our prevalent EDR vendors is they weren't doing that when they pushed out that content update and they took down everything. And so from the risk perspective, every one of our customers has a minimum requirement of testing it on X number of machines that are not in the global production set. They can't push it to any of their servers until they've seen that it works for, let's call it 72 hours inside of the base user environment. So best case scenario, your critical servers are catching it within a 72 to 96 hour window. Even then, we have no idea how many of those machines are going to be able to reboot because I was just reading about it. This is a required reboot patch. So there's a certain subset of machines in every environment that are critical for business and can't reboot out of band without affecting
Mhm.
business. So some of these could still be out here 6 months from now.
That's wild.
Yeah, that reboot's a killer. I didn't
Yeah.
catch that part. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Yes, we're in the era of patch and reboot. That's for sure. Yeah.
that reboot is the biggest issue. I come across it sometimes we're in an environment and like we have to do something or the client doesn't have a certain security tool in place and can't just reboot, you know. It's extremely more involved. So, but on this round of who's been hacked and what are we being scared about potentially, I think that's enough that we've covered. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to mention on this episode of Tevora Talks before we sign off?
No, I think we covered it.
Final words
Yeah, I
of
think that's
wisdom.
great.
Any last minute words of wisdom for our listeners out there, Josh?
Yeah, patch your systems and don't trust anybody. I think those are the things we need to remember.
As always, trust but verify and patch it up. Patch Tuesday, it's a thing. I don't know who came up with that term. Maybe is that Microsoft Patch Tuesday? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's a Microsoft thing for sure. Yeah.
It's catchy. It should be on a t-shirt. But nonetheless, Josh, it's been a pleasure having you on the show with us. Thanks for giving us some of your time and dropping some knowledge on all of us and our amazing listeners out there. Clayton, as always, pleasure speaking with you. Looking forward to more hot, exciting cyber hack and cyber related news. We'll bring it to you 1 week at a time. But for this episode, hopefully you got some good information out of it. If you have Windows, this IPv6 is a real threat. Make sure you patch as you can. And I don't know, work on validating your users before you just hire somebody and sending the laptop to the wrong location. So with that said, until we can figure out a way to get some new eyeballs, that's all we got for you on this episode of Tevora Talks. Till next time.